Okay, it's recording.
Good evening. There are a number of new faces here this evening, so I'm going to take a couple minutes just to introduce myself and Americans United before we start our program. My name is Ed Joyce, and I'm the president of the Delaware Valley chapter of Americans United for Separation of Church and State. Welcome. Thank you for attending this evening's event. Before we get started, I want to tell you a little bit about Americans United and a little bit about the Delaware Valley chapter. Americans United was founded way back in the middle of the 20th century by a coalition of educators, religious leaders, and civic leaders for the sole purpose of guaranteeing each one of us our constitutional right to practice the religion of our choice or refrain from practicing as your conscience dictates. Americans United home office is in Washington, D.C., and nationally there are over 100,000 members in Americans United. We are the only national organization that devotes 100% of our time and energy to church-state separation issues. And something I want to make very clear is that we are not anti-religious, in spite of what you might hear in the media. To prove that, our members represent a broad cross-section of beliefs and many non-believers as well. We have a clergy, the Delaware Valley chapter has a clergy advisory board made up of 5 local clergy members that interact with us regarding religious issues. And Barry Lynn, our executive director, is an ordained United Church of Christ minister. So once again, we are in no way anti-religious. In fact, we are very pro-religious in that we stand up for people's rights to practice a religion of their choice. I want to tell you a little bit about the Delaware Valley chapter. We have 2 mandates. We educate and we act as constitutional eyes and ears. Educationally, we do things like this. Every year, we hold a church-state issues symposium at the National Constitution Center. However, we are not doing that in 2013. We are replacing it with 2014. I knew it all along. You guys were on the ball. In lieu of our symposium, we are sponsoring a debate between Barry Lynn, our executive director, and Jay Sekulow. If you watch Fox News, which I don't, but I hear that he's on Fox a lot. He has his own radio program. I heard he has his own television program on a public radio station. But he seems like a nice guy. I communicated with him. He seems intelligent, but he's pretty far to the right. So it should be a very interesting and educational event. It will be held on the campus of University of Pennsylvania, and it is on March 26th. So if you are not getting our emails, make sure you sign up, and we'll keep you posted about the location, more details about the location and time, etc., etc. So basically, what we do educationally is we just get the word out. We keep the conversation about church-state separation lively among the public. That is really our educational goal. Constitutionally, New Jersey, Governor Christie keeps us busy. We've been watching his voucher bill. He's been pushing this thing for years now, and in fact, if you heard his State of the State address just last week or the week before, this was probably his first State of the State address where he did not mention school vouchers, and that could be because he has things like bridges on his mind. He might have other things on his mind. If you're not familiar with school vouchers, as we see them, are essentially backdoor ways of sneaking federal taxpayer dollars to fund religious schools. About 90% of voucher dollars end up going to religious schools, so that is why we're against them. For some reason, Governor Christie is pushing hard on vouchers, but maybe he's slowed up a little in 2014. Another issue we're watching with Christie's administration is a small issue of $10.6 million that he's earmarked to fund 2 religious schools in New Jersey. Church-state separation means anything. It means taxpayer dollars do not go to build or repair religious institutions. In fact, one of our New Jersey members is a plaintiff in the case. AU, along with a couple other groups, has a lawsuit there. So we will keep you informed as that progresses. As far as Pennsylvania goes, compared to Pennsylvania, New Jersey is Berkeley, California. Pennsylvania has some real issues. There has been a number of toxic pieces of legislation that has been proposed or that have come out of Harrisburg in the last couple of years, which hasn't been the case previously. So that's the focus of tonight's meeting, this shift, this apparent right-wing, or this obvious right-wing shift in the makeup of our Pennsylvania House of Representatives. And just back in November, a group of us went to Harrisburg. There was a bill coming up before the Education Committee called the Academic Freedom Bill that we will talk about in a few minutes. And we went to Harrisburg to talk to representatives who were on the Education Committee, just to let them know that maybe this Academic Freedom Bill isn't the best policy. And just to give you a feeling for how far right our government has gone, we met with a number of legislators, and one that I met with, she was on the Education Committee. I was there with Reverend Tom Beers, who is a Baptist minister who is on our Clergy Advisory Board. So I was about 5 minutes into my little pitch about why this bill might not be a good idea, and she stopped me cold, and she said to me that the reason that she wants to see creation in our public schools is that she is being bold for Jesus. There was a colleague of hers sitting next door, another House representative, and he said to me that it's because of groups like Americans United that women dress promiscuously. He said that. This gives you just a little snippet of what we're dealing with. Mike O'Brien, Representative Mike O'Brien, a Democrat from Philadelphia, who some of you may know, sent me an email, and this is what he had to say. I simply cannot understand why this crop of new legislators are so hell-bent on moving toward a religious state. Certainly, it is contrary to all that William Penn believed in founding this Commonwealth. And tonight, we're very fortunate to have another member of the House of Representatives with us this evening, Representative Mark Cohen. I've worked with Mark on a couple other issues. He is a strong supporter of church-state separation, as is his whole office, good office to work with. And Mark agreed to be here tonight to talk about, in general, the state of the legislature. And at the same time, we're going to go through a number of these bills. I said that there are a number of toxic bills that come up. I'd like to go through a number of these, just get Representative Cohen's input on it, and then we'll turn it over to the audience for questions and comments. A few words about Representative Cohen before we start here. Representative Cohen is a Democratic representative from the 202nd District in Philadelphia. He is sometimes known as the Dean of the Pennsylvania General Assembly. Did you know that? The longest, and the reason is he's the longest serving member in either the House or the Senate. He was elected in 1974 and has been re-elected in every election since. So that's a lot easier. For 7 years, Representative Cohen served as chairman of the Pennsylvania House Labor Relations Committee, and during his tenure, he has fought to protect the rights of workers and working families by increasing the minimum wage and protecting workers' compensation benefits. From 1990 to 2010, Representative Cohen was elected as the Democratic Caucus Chairman, and he currently serves as the Democratic Chairman of the House Human Services Committee. Representative Cohen is a graduate of Philadelphia High School. He received his bachelor's degree from the University of Pennsylvania, a Juris Doctorate from Widener University Law School, and an MBA from Lebanon Valley College. Welcome, Representative Cohen. Before we begin, I'd like to just ask Representative Cohen just to share with us just his general view on church-state separation and its role in a governing body.
Well, a good reason to have church-state separation is to keep people from fighting each other all the time. Everybody has an almost unique concept of his relationship with God, or whether or not God exists, and creating an endless series of debates in our daily lives about what people think about religion is a big distraction. If people want to discuss religion, they're free to do so. People are free to worship or not worship as they see fit. And our country thrives because people can discuss, debate, argue about, ignore whatever issues they want to. Going back to the days in which Pennsylvania was a British colony, the British Parliament had different rules for different groups of people. It sounds hard to believe, but it's true that the British Parliament, the House of Commons, and the House of Lords would debate things like what rights should Presbyterians have. And then when they finished debating what rights should Presbyterians, they discussed what rights should Catholics have, and what rights should Jews have, what rights should Quakers have. And they kept them, they kept themselves pretty busy for a very long period of time, arguing exactly how the laws should apply to people of different religions. In America, we figured out pretty early that that's not the best way to run things. We treat everybody the same. There's one set of laws, supposedly at least, for people of every religion, people of no religion. We don't discuss the rights of any one religious group. We discuss the rights of everybody. And that's a much better way to run a country. I think we have to preserve that and not let the religious right try to endlessly polarize us and force us endlessly to debate their pet issues.
And I think what you're saying dovetails very nicely with Americans United stand, and what we simply ask is that government remains neutral with respect to religion. Just remain neutral with respect to religion. I'd like to transition now into a couple of these bills, a number of these bills that have come out over the last few years. One bill in particular got a lot of attention. We discussed this at a number of meetings over the last couple of years. We had a huge letter writing campaign. I was interviewed by a Harrisburg radio station about this. And this was House Resolution 535, whose sponsor was Rick Saccone, whose name you will hear more than once this evening. This was a Year of the Bible bill. It was introduced as a non-controversial bill, and it was passed unanimously in 2012. And I just have to say here, and Mark can elaborate, it snuck through. And from what I understand, if a bill is labeled non-controversial, some of our representatives may not look as closely at the bill as perhaps they should. Well, this one passed unanimously, and you-know-what hit the fan. And from what I understand, Mark and a number of other legislators who everybody thought would never sign a bill like this, signed it, and their phones were ringing off the hook. Before I turn it over, before I ask for Mark's comment, just one sentence here from, this is taken right from the bill, from Mr. Cohen's bill. The Bible, the Word of God, has made a unique contribution in shaping the United States as a distinctive and blessed nation and people. What have you got to say about that?
Well, clearly we are a distinctive nation and blessed people, and Rick Cohen and others have a very odd view of God. They think God is dependent upon the daily affirmation of the Pennsylvania legislature. In their view, God spends all his time watching the Pennsylvania legislature, and he gets terribly depressed if a day goes by and the Pennsylvania legislature doesn't do something to honor him. And it's the Cohen's view, the Pennsylvania legislature, it's really a very anti-religious view. The Pennsylvania legislature is above God. God looks up with awe and reverence to the Pennsylvania legislature. And that's not really the way anybody else sees it. But people are afraid, and there's a certain bullying approach here. The goal is, I dare you, vote against God. And everybody is scared to death that there's going to be campaign literature circulated. Your legislator voted against God. Vote him out of office. And indeed, there was a famous election in Michigan, I believe, in which there was a Jewish candidate and a Protestant candidate competing, and the Protestant candidate made a big deal of he believes that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. He's the only one in this race who believes that. And it got a lot of publicity. And that's what some people on the religious right would like to do, is try to convert everything into a religious debate, and to get people to focus on religion and not their economic interests or their social interests. And that's something we have to fight. One good thing about the fight over the Year of the Bible is that we got a lot of people to pay more attention to these non-controversial resolutions. And Speaker Smith's suggestion was, well, you think our resolutions aren't representing the full diversity of opinion in the Commonwealth? Go introduce your own resolutions. So I started doing that. At first came up with the Year of Religious Diversity, which was which Smith would not consider non-controversial. But then we came up with a whole series of other resolutions, recognizing people with disabilities, recognizing the anniversary of Kristallnacht, which was an important event in Nazi German Jewish relations, and a whole series of other bills. And I wasn't the only one who came up with these things. Eventually, we had hundreds of resolutions coming up all the time. And Republicans were getting pretty annoyed and seeing all these resolutions with Democratic co-sponsors passing unanimously every day. So they got some of their own medicine. And they put pressure on Smith, you got to stop all these resolutions. So they got their own medicine back, and they didn't like it. We have to be aware of the religious right. And we have to be aware that when we vote Republicans into office, whether we like it or not, we're helping to empower them. And I remember when the Tea Party first started, it talked about, we are focused on economic issues. We don't care about abortion. We don't care about gay rights. We just care about economics. And a lot of people were impressed by that. And they voted numbers for the Tea Party candidates. Then the Tea Party candidates get into office, and sure enough, they hadn't talked about where they stood on abortion or any of the other right-wing issues. But then they proceeded to introduce anti-abortion bills. They proceeded to introduce a whole litany of bills dealing with separation of church and state in the wrong direction. And it's clear that you put the people of Pennsylvania, the people of the United States, put these guys in office, whether they talk about it or not, you're getting the hard right radical agenda. And I think people have to be very, very cautious about voting Republican. The Republican Party has concluded that whatever votes they've lost by the shift to the right, they've already lost anyway, so there's nothing further to be lost in political terms by moving farther and farther to the right. It really depends. I mean, for a lot of people's political views can be discussed as, well, I vote the way my family's always voted. In the 1850s, the Democrats were against German immigration, and the Republicans favored German immigration. So it's only been 160 years since then. So I'm a German ancestor. I think I ought to vote in support of German immigration. Well, there has been a controversy over German immigration for a long time, and there hasn't been a controversy over the Civil War for a long time. And it doesn't really matter to a very substantial degree what our grandparents or great-grandparents or great-grandparents thought about the issues. And I think all of us have to have the ability to study the issues and to make decisions about political parties and political issues without regard to what our parents or grandparents or great-grandparents or great-great-grandparents where they stood on the issues of political party. It's very interesting that the states that went for Abraham Lincoln in 1860 almost all went for Barack Obama in 2008 and 2012. And the states that voted against Abraham Lincoln tended to vote for Mitt Romney and John McCain. It's getting tough to remember the candidates. And so there has been a conversion of the people over the years, and an awful lot of people vote differently from the way the other ancestors voted. People have to continue not attacking everybody's ancestors, but people have to be looking and seeing what candidates stand for in 21st century American politics, and not whether they're the same party that their great-great-great-grandfather supported. My grandfather, Harry Herzog, was a big fan of Theodore Roosevelt, and he kept framed for his entire life his immigration papers signed by Theodore Roosevelt. And he thought Theodore Roosevelt was a great Republican, but he eventually became a Democrat, and he didn't urge that we had to vote Republican forever, because he had voted for Theodore Roosevelt in 1912. It's time for people's views to evolve, and to a surprising degree, their views have not evolved. People are stuck in political preference, and they don't pay attention to issues.
Just to add to Mark's character of Cohen, Mark told me that at the beginning of each legislative session, they say the Pledge of Allegiance. And when it gets to one nation under God, Cohen screams that out. So he's just so full. He's so full of the Lord, like Mark was implying, that just bubbles out of him, apparently. These next couple of bills have to do with our schools. There was a House Bill 1427, introduced by Representative Robert Kaufman in May of 2013, and it was referred to the House Committee on Education. This was an act providing for voluntary student expression of religious viewpoints in public schools. The bill encourages student religious expressions in the classroom and at school events, including religious expression in class assignments, the freedom to organize student religious groups and activities, and the expression of religious views by student speakers at non-graduation events. Americans United has a number of issues about this bill, and before I chime in, I wanted to hear what Mark had to say about House Bill 1427.
Well, Representative Bloom believes that evolution is wrong, and that it's a wrong theory, and it violates the will of God. And he thinks we ought to be able to have discussions in every classroom all the time about whether the evolution theory is correct or whether it's not correct. And
Mark,
yes.
a second. This was, actually, I don't know the name of this bill. I never got a name for this. This was Robert Kaufman's bill, HB 1427. What you were addressing was the academic freedom,
Yes.
academic freedom.
Addressing the academic.
Yeah, so this was a bill that essentially said that, that our schools need more religious expression, and it opened the doors to a lot of religious expression in the public.
I think that's correct.
Yeah.
And again, the question is, we want to have people spending all their time debating religion or not. And we want to have a vote in every classroom. Everybody here who's Christian, raise their hand. Everybody who's not Christian, raise their hand. That's not what we really want to do. We want to treat everybody as equal citizens in all regards. We don't want anybody to feel ashamed that they're not Christian. We don't want anybody to think that they don't have equal rights because they're not Christian. We don't want to convert daily life into a referendum as to who's Christian and who's not Christian. According to a recent poll, 48% of the country is not Christian. That's a lot of people. So, well over 160 million people, and it's almost as many as all the other religious beliefs combined. But there shouldn't be intimidation. The bottom line is there shouldn't be intimidation to be part of any religion or not. People ought to have free choice without harassment, without group pressure, to worship God or not worship God is their thing. If they want to be Sikhs or Muslims or Buddhists or Hindus or atheists or agnostics or Jews or Catholics or Unitarians or Methodists or Baptists or Episcopalians or whatever, that's their freedom. They can do that. And the government ought not to be organizing people to put pressure on minorities in different areas. That's not our role.
What rankled Americans United about this particular bill is that most of these freedoms are already allowed. I mean, if a student wants to, he can write a paper on some religious belief. If he wants to pray in school, he can pray. There's plenty of opportunity. There's after-school. There's after-school opportunities for Bible study classes. What bothered us about this bill was that it was bringing up a lot of freedoms that were already available and just restating them in a very pro-Christian way. And as Mark said, phrasing this bill, phrasing these freedoms in a Christian way intimidates the minority religions and the non-believers. So obviously a toxic piece of legislation, and I'm not sure where it is. It was referred to the House Committee on Education. I never heard it going any further.
It probably will not go further.
Just a little too toxic. The next bill is what Mark started alluding to. That's the academic freedom bill. And this, I have being a scientist, I have a real problem with this bill because it makes one believe that it's opening up the door for students for a lot of individual inquiry and questioning about science. But really, what it's aimed at, as you can probably guess, is that it's another way of sneaking creationism into our public schools. If you've been following the creationist debate, it started with trying to get creationism in our schools. It failed, got shot down. That initiative evolved, or de-evolved, to intelligent design. So intelligent design was just a repackaging of creationism. That got shot down. It got shot down right here in Pennsylvania, in fact. And then now what they're trying to do is they're trying to say that evolution is a theory in crisis, and that the crisis in this controversy, this big controversy surrounding education, surrounding evolution, should be taught in our classrooms. So that's essentially what this academic freedom bill, and if you read it, it's almost identical to other academic freedom bills that were introduced in other parts of the country, in other states. So it's clear that there is some organization, I think it's in Seattle, who is driving this. They're looking for sympathetic members of state legislatures in order to introduce essentially the same academic freedom bill.
Yeah, plagiarism laws, rules, policies, whatever, don't really apply to legislation. Anybody can copy the bill that's introduced in another state. Nothing is considered wrong with that. Indeed, legislators in states are really proud when somebody else copies their bill, and they view that as a vindication. And the peak experience is when the federal government copies the state legislative bill, people say, wow, we really made it. So that's not unusual. And there are a lot of organizations on the right and on the left and in the center that look carefully at what happens in various state legislatures and recommend bills saying that this bill that passed in this state deserves wide emulation.
By the way, this bill passed the Education Committee by along partisan lines. All the Democrats voted against it, all the Republicans voted for it. This was a bill that our little group of Delaware Valley chapter people went to discuss. So yeah, it's
What's next then? It passed. It's going to be.
yeah. So what's the next step for this bill? So it passed out of the Education Committee. Nothing's been done on it since.
Well, it probably will ultimately have to pass on the House floor, and people may not want to vote on it for the House. But there are differences in the Republican Party as to how extreme they want to be. There are people who believe that if anybody at all agrees with you, you're selling out. And so you have these real purists who will take the Republican Party off a cliff if the rest of the Republican Party lets them.
I think I talked to a couple of them. Yeah.
So there's some people who would like the Republican Party to actually be able to win elections, and all these bills are dangerous to Republican parties winning elections. But there are bigger dangers. People generally have their eyes open and are paying attention to what's going on in Harrisburg.
Well, horrible piece of legislation. I hope it doesn't go any further. Another bill, one of our favorites, that caused a lot of commotion. In fact, we had at least one, maybe two letters to the editor published on this. I was interviewed on the radio twice about this bill, and we had some other activity around it too. This was the In God We Trust bill. This was House Bill 1728. Sponsor was very good, Rick Cohen. It was tabled in January of this year, and there has been no action. I just want to read over just a little bit about the bill. This was an act that provided for the display of the national motto, "In God We Trust," in classrooms and other areas in public school buildings. And what I didn't say here was the mandatory display of "In God We Trust" somewhere obvious in school, and I think the bills even had a size, dimensions of the sign, and that it should be put someplace that was real obvious to everybody. Yeah, in every school building.
Well,
Any thoughts?
I think this is totally counterproductive to religion. It's totally counterproductive to God. If God is looking down and watching the Pennsylvania legislature every day, he must be shaking his head. These guys are going too far. I happen to be part of a Senate delegation led by then Senator Bill Armstrong, Pennsylvania Senator, and Representative Roebuck of the House Education Committee was a member of that. And it was, the whole thing was sponsored by Freedom Force, an organization co-founded by Jimmy Carter. And it encouraged people to go see foreign countries, especially foreign countries where the United States had historic difficulties. So we trooped over to the Soviet Union in 1987, and we saw busts of Lenin all over. You couldn't go more than a few feet, just about anywhere in the area we traveled in, at least, without coming across a bust of Lenin or a statue of Lenin. There are hundreds of thousands of these things all over the Soviet Union. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, a few years later, one of the things the protesters did was they tore all of them down. People were tired of seeing Lenin everywhere they went. And I think this just Leninizes God. It just makes him like a totem of oppression. That's not what God should be by any definition. People ought to be able to worship God either privately or in the house of worship of their choice. They shouldn't be confronted with God in every school, in every room. I mean, once you put in God we trust in every school, some would say you haven't gone far enough. What about in every classroom? You put in every classroom, people would say, well, what about on every wall?
Tattooed on every child.
Yeah. This stuff is endless. I mean, the idea that God is this weak, pitiful being whose feelings will somehow be hurt if people are not constantly looking at him or considering him is ridiculous. And it's basically anti our religious feeling. It does not put people and God in any kind of reasonable relation. It makes God a somewhat oppressive force, which can't be his will. You look at the religious observance in other countries. In the United States, we've had separation of church and state for a long time. It was an early principle in Pennsylvania. It was an early principle in Rhode Island. And gradually other states came to agree this is a pretty good idea. And the religious observance in the United States is far, far higher than it is in Europe. And in Europe, they don't have a principle of separation of church and state. in Europe, you have religion taught in schools, and probably Rick Cohen and company would be a lot more comfortable in Europe. But in Europe, despite all the governmental intervention in religion, despite all the efforts to make religion something like a PennDOT office or a post office, run by the government, people choose not to be members of churches or identify themselves as adherents of religion much more than they do in the United States. Government doesn't help religion. Government just bureaucratizes it and takes individual expression away and standardizes it and just makes it part of the annoyances of everyday life instead of something sacred and important to many people. And personal. Sacred, personal, important. I'm sure there are other adjectives as well that could apply. But if people think that abolishing church and state distinctions helps religion, they should look at Europe. And they should look at all the polls that have been taken showing that the amount of religious observance in the vast majority of European countries where there is no separation of church and state, where religion is part of the schools and part of a lot of other governmental functions, they should look at how low the religious observance is in those countries and ask whether or not the government involvement in religion has helped cause that decline.
Good point. Ellen and I, when we were in Harrisburg, we had the opportunity to spend about 20 minutes or half hour in Rick Cohen's office talking with him two-on-one. I won't give you all the dirty details that got into his office, but anyway, I have to say, he's a nice guy. He was very cordial. However, he kept insisting that his long history of bills that are obviously very pro-religious have nothing to do with religion at all. So the Academic Freedom Bill was simply to open up the door for freer student thinking. The In God We Trust bill, he said, was an historical bill. His only purpose for bringing it up was as a historical document to recognize the fact that In God We Trust is rooted deeply in American history, back to 1956.
Unfortunately, 1956 is becoming farther and farther away as time goes on.
So it's, in spite of him being a very nice, cordial person, he kept insisting. In fact, I got a little bold with him. I said, Rick, come on. You have a whole string of very religious bills here. How can you say that they're not religiously motivated? Well, they're not. He was quite a character. Okay, just one more bill here that I want to sneak on Representative Cohen here. I might have failed to let his assistant know that I was going to bring this bill up. Anyway, it is Representative Cohen's House Resolution 157. It was introduced as a non-controversial bill in March of 2013, and it designated 2013 as the year of religious diversity. This resolution recognizes and celebrates the religious diversity encompassed by Pennsylvania as fulfillment of the vision of William Penn. In this resolution, Mark cited 17 different religions that were all practiced in Pennsylvania, probably not all, but he picked 17 of probably the most popular religions, and then he also cited 10 holy books, or various holy books coming from different religions, and he cited the positive effects that these books had on our society. And I quote here, "These revered books impart great wisdom and beauty to believers and are appreciated and respected by non-believers as well. Therefore, be it resolved that the House of Representatives recognize and celebrate the religious diversity encompassed by Pennsylvania as a fulfillment of the vision of William Penn. I don't think anybody in this room can argue against the flavor of this bill. Certainly everybody has to agree. However, this bill caused quite a debate amongst members of Americans United, both here in Pennsylvania and at our home office in Washington, D.C. Because some wise guys, some wisecrackers raised the question of whether or not elected officials should be making religious proclamations of any kind, whether we agree with those religious proclamations or not. And some would even argue that making religious proclamations is the job of the clergy, not elected officials. So with that,
Well,
I'd like to turn this over to you. Phil, what do you think?
well, I mean, anybody's entitled to any opinion they want. You know, I think we're trying to represent people of Pennsylvania and see that people aren't stigmatized. That's basically my interest in this, in seeing that all Pennsylvanians, regardless of religion, regardless of lack of religion, are not stigmatized, are free to do whatever they want. And I think it's good to find ways that the Pennsylvania legislature promote that, especially when we have people like Rick Cohen and Stephen Bloom and others trying to undermine that. I think it's good to affirmatively say we're for it. But anybody can be for whatever they want to be. And, life goes on.
I think this is probably a good place to stop, since it could probably be a springboard for some further discussion with you. Any comments or questions? Yes.
For Representative Cohen,
Yeah.
now you've been in the legislature since 1974, so you've seen a lot of members come and go. And I'm curious if you could describe, based on your experience, the combination of the personality in the legislator and the district that the legislator comes from that produces this. And I don't mean, sitting in Philadelphia, it might sound like I'm asking you to beat up on somebody, and that's not at all my intention. Like, I mean, you have to have observed this, this cultural combination come to Harrisburg over and over again, and I just wonder if you could give some insight into why, where, how.
Well, there's no general rule. People interpret the district as they see fit. It depends on how deeply rooted the people are, how aware they are of history, how aggressive people who live in the district are about making themselves known. I personally am proud that Noam Chomsky grew up in my district, that Edward Herman grew up in my district, that I.F. Stone I grew up in my legislative district, Ellery Shemp grew up in my legislative district. We go down the streets of my legislative district and say, who are these guys? And an awful lot of people aren't going to know. So it depends on the person who holds the seat to a substantial degree. It depends upon the electorate. I think you have a wide range of discretion as a legislator in terms of what you emphasize. But just because you have discretion, I mean, ultimately the people have a right to decide. Like I have been outspoken on this issue, I've been outspoken on that issue, and my outspokenness has led to a very well-funded primary election challenge. And almost all the funding, and the disproportionate percent of my funding too, comes from outside of the legislative district. Our district doesn't have huge numbers of people who write checks or make online contributions to political campaigns. But ultimately, the people get to decide as to whether the legislator's vision of what his or her district is, what it believes, is accurate. And it's been said that the Tea Party movement in Pennsylvania started in 2005 as a reaction against the legislative pay increase of 2005. And there's some truth to that. But it took organized effort by people raising objections to a legislative pay raise attempt to convert that into an issue. If everybody had sat there silently, the public would not have cared very much. It takes organization to make things count. It takes outreach from citizens to the legislator. It takes outreach of citizens to other citizens. What a district, how a district is defined, depends on what do people meet about. The fact that there's a meeting in Center City in the district of Bryan Sims tonight dealing with church-state relations is significant. I cannot tell you if there was ever such a meeting in my legislative district. There certainly hasn't been in the last 40 years. And gradually, meetings, what meetings take place, what organization takes place, who lives in the district, what significance that person has to the people of the district. This all gradually defines the character of the district. It's an interpretive art. There's no clear rules. I mean, one could come up with a whole range of leading progressives in my district. One could also come up with conservative votes. One of the legislators in my district cast a dissenting vote against fair housing in 1967. Strongly defended that position for years, saying people in his district didn't want fair housing. People in my district opposed civil rights legislation. There were people in my district who supported the coup in World War II, supported the Nazi bomb. I mean, a more conservative person could carve out a conservative tradition in the district. I think that the election returns, showing landslide victories for me, landslide victories for President Obama and numerous other Democrats, show that my interpretation of the district is the more valid one. But it's an interpretive art, and people can, the district that my colleague Darrell Metcalf is from, he was succeeded by a moderate feminist, woman named Pat Cohen, who was very torn on all the issues and was under cross pressure in the district. And she was well known for his various statements. So, well, we could do this, we could do that. And, she was not tremendously decisive. But one of his predecessors, and Darrell Metcalf is the sponsor, is the sponsor of the act that's been declared unconstitutional now by the Commonwealth Court, restricting people's rights to vote without identification. One of Darrell Metcalf's predecessors was a guy named James Green. And James Green was the guy who led the effort successfully to expand the right to vote through mail registration. And when I met with Darrell Metcalf, he was chairman, he was the Republican leader for the prior session, and I was not the Democratic leader of the committee in the last session. Beth Josephs represented this district was. And we had a discussion, and I was able to go, because I had been there for 40 years, I went over the history of the people I knew who represented his district, and I discussed Representative Green with him, who was just about the polar opposite on voter and he'd heard of Representative Green. I don't think he'd ever met Representative Green. It was interesting. Representative Green obviously viewed that same district very differently than Representative Metcalf did. But Representative Green was a very ambitious man, and he wanted to move up. After one term in the House, he was looking to run for other offices. And Metcalf has chosen to stay in the House of Representatives since he was first elected in 1978. So, you know, that's the basic answer. It's not simple, it's interpretive.
Yes.
All right. I actually wanted to have a question for you, Representative Cohen. Actually, about your House Bill 157. I actually would be part of the group that would disagree. I do not hold those books with any more reverence than I do any other books. And
I'm sorry, you don't hold what?
I don't hold that list of books with any more reverence than I would any other books. So there's that. But putting that aside, I really just wanted to ask, what is exactly the point of these resolutions? Even in this religious diversity one, trying to declare the state, the year of whatever, you can't possibly include everybody. It's just impossible, especially with something as nebulous as religious belief. So even less nebulous things like disability, you could never cover the entire range. So what is the purpose of declaring?
The purpose is to express values. It's been part of legislative bodies forever. Congress passes resolutions, City Council passes resolutions, other states pass resolutions. It's a way of expressing values that people in the legislatures have and society has as a whole, and usually it's harmless. There's not great significance. I mean, obviously legislation which mandates people to do things is much more significant than a resolution which just expresses a value. There's no question about that. But the effort is, Representative Cohen is a perfect example. If he wants us to express religious values, then he has a whole series of mandatory legislation that he wants to pass. And so what he's trying to do is use the resolution process to gain support for mandatory legislation that has real significance. And it matters what people say. It has some significance. The Jewish community is deeply scarred by the rise of Adolf Hitler. And for years, Adolf Hitler was going around making anti-Semitic statements. And his followers were going around making anti-Semitic statements. And other citizens of Germany were going around making anti-Semitic statements. And obviously, over time, those statements had an impact. And Germany is after World War II, limited the ability of Germans to make anti-Semitic statements. That would not be constitutional under American law, but Germany doesn't operate under the American Constitution. And so I cite that not as something I'm recommending, but I cite that it is just evidence that statements that are not binding on anybody have some ultimate significance.
Yes.
And that's what the resolutions are a form of those kind of statements.
That answered my question.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
I'm interested in what motivates legislators in Harrisburg. For that matter, I'm interested in what motivates all politicians, but specifically in the area of the role of church-state separation. I'm wondering whether such a large number of legislators find that the people that you're dealing with are really expressing their values, are really coming from a sincere place versus to what extent they're just trying to maintain a power position?
Well, it's difficult for me to tell other people's sincerity. Yeah, I tend to take people at face value. Sometimes I've been proven wrong in that. The motives are more complex than they are on the face. But I don't think there's any general rule. I mean, obviously, in the long term, anything might be good or sound good the first time people hear it. I would suspect that the constituents in Rick's district, after he's heard about, heard Rick talk for the 20th time on this, the 10th time, or the 30th time, sooner or later this wears thin. The ultimate purpose of having legislators is to see that government runs more efficiently and more inclusively than it would if we just let the governor make all the decisions. And this stuff is kind of irrelevant to the more important purposes of government. It's important that we be vigilant. I guess religious right would indicate it's important, would say it's important they be vigilant against the erosion of respect for God. But this isn't really what we do as a state legislature. This isn't ultimately what we're going to be judged on. We're ultimately going to be judged on what are we going to do and what have we done to improve the lives of our citizens. Do we have roads that go somewhere? And is it possible to get from one place to another? That's one place. Do we have schools that actually teach? The kids get jobs when they graduate. The kids develop a love of learning which improves their lives. What are people's health? Do we have an adequate system of doctors and hospitals in Pennsylvania? Can people afford medical care? And one can go on and on and on with other issues that are in the long term more relevant to people's lives than these questions are. My personal goal on these issues is to keep religious discussions private to the degree people want to keep them private. People should not be dragged before some kind of authority in the school or anywhere, or in the office or anywhere else, and forced to conform with this or that religious practice. That's not our job. A religion is much stronger when it's voluntary, and I want religious choices to remain strictly voluntary, not voluntary with a wink and nod, yeah, it's voluntary, but people are coerced or strongly pushed by governmental authority in one direction or another. That's not what our country ought to be about. Our country ought to be about the welfare of the people in our country, and us in the United States exerting a good, positive, constructive, peaceful influence on the world.
What I'm hearing here is that there's a lot of work to be done besides and over and above making religious statement.
Absolutely.
I also have concerns about religious exemptions. They've come up a bit in the Affordable Care Act, which isn't